Yo, 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 what's up, party people? Welcome to another episode of Thrive and Dive. Thriving in life as we dive into deeper conversations. And I'm joined here once again by my boy, Mr. David Adams.
Woo, woo.
It's good to have David Adams back on Thrive and Dive. We had a great conversation a couple weeks, probably a couple months ago now, about youth ministry, youth trips, and everything youth related, because me and David work for the same youth ministry, and we had a great conversation about that. So hopefully check that out if you haven't already, because it's always a joy to hear David share his wisdom on the topics here on Thrive and Dive. So I figured, hey, let's have him again, because he did so well the first time. So no pressure, David. You got to do well a second time.
I feel great under pressure.
Feel great under pressure. Under pressure. All right, so a little bit of thriving before we dive into our topic today. David, the time of when we're filming this is late September, but we might release it a little later. And I'm just curious, how has your September been treating you? What are the highlights of September? What are some of the lowlights of September?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, right now I've just been chilling a lot. I just finished school for barbering, so I've just been relaxing and enjoying a little bit of time off before I start
Congrats
working again.
to that. I think I have a applause emoji.
Yeah, so that was nice to finish.
There you go. The whole world is celebrating you finishing barbering school.
Yeah, so I've just been really hanging out a little bit, been enjoying some time off, and playing a bit of golf. Not
Ooh.
well, but I've been playing golf.
Okay, good little golfing. That's
yeah.
a good skill, a good tool to have in your tool belt. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been hanging out with this guy. We played poker last night.
Ooh, good old poker. That should probably be a topic on Thrive and Dive, because some people cringe in Christian circles on the game of poker. And I think there's a way to play it where it is God glorifying and good fellowship.
100%. I mean, last night we didn't even play that much poker. We were mainly talking, and we were just talking about like Bible stuff. We didn't really play much poker.
Yeah, we had more of a biblical discussion with a little bit of poker on the side. It was good. We were up till like almost 2 a.m. just talking about biblical topics, a lot of topics, which we're not going to get into in this episode, but maybe in future episodes we'll address those hardy poker Bible conversations. But they were good. I was encouraged by it. I'm a little tired because of how late we were up, but it was worth it, indeed. Yeah, can you actually toss me my phone, David? Appreciate it, brother. Cool. Well, anything else to share about your September before we dive into our topic today?
I don't even remember like what the beginning of September was, like what I was doing at the very beginning.
Okay.
I mean, just doing a lot of stuff here. We've been having a lot of fun. Played pickleball with the whole youth last week.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Yo, that was super cool. Yeah. We, as David was saying, we instead of meeting at the church for our high school youth night, we took the church to pickleball. We have a park here in Vero Beach called South County Park, and they just installed 12 brand new pickleball courts, and we took full advantage of those courts. And David and I must say, we played pretty well. We showed those kids who's boss. I personally went undefeated the entire night. I don't think David can say the same thing, because I remember I did beat him once.
Well, I was trying to be nice and pick some of the kids that maybe weren't as good, James. I was trying to,
I beat you when you were playing with Pastor Nate.
Did you?
Yeah, are you saying Pastor Nate is one of the kids that weren't too good?
He's one of the less fortunate. I was trying to help out.
No,
have a good time.
Yeah, it was me and Edie against you and Pastor Nate. And we demolished you guys. Shout out to Pastor Nate if you're watching. Yeah. But that was cool. Yeah, pickleball youth group. That was awesome. We also had an ice cream night not too long ago, and David and Joseph, who's been on the channel, had a little bit of ice cream eating competition. Check that out. I'll eventually put it on YouTube. But yeah, no, things are going good in the youth department, I must say. A lot of fun times, a lot of hanging out, a lot of thriving, right?
Yep.
So that's good. Awesome. Well, we want to continue to thrive because, guys, there's a little heartbeat behind the name, actually. I don't think I've ever shared why I named this podcast Thrive and Dive, other than I thought it sounded kind of cool. Some people judge the title. It's okay. Whatever. Don't listen to the haters. But I always loved the word thrive, because when I was in high school and in college, my father specifically always challenged me, be a blessing to everyone you interact with, be an encouragement, be someone, he didn't use this exact words, but how I translate, be someone, David, who is thriving in life, so that when people see you, they're like, man, why does this guy have so much joy? Why is this
Yeah.
guy so upbeat? You know, because you see people, they're just surviving, man. They're just like going through life, kind of gloomy, kind of like, woe is me. Oh, I'm so busy. Oh, I've got so much to do. Oh, the world's coming at me, right? I want to flip the script and be like, you know what? I want to thrive. I want to see people to see that the joy of the Lord is my strength, and that there is satisfaction and fun and fulfillment in a relationship with Him. Because I don't think there's anything more. I'm sure there's things more. It's so contradictory to see a gloomy Christian. Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. Like, what? You have the living God living inside of you, and you're gloomy?
Not great advertisement.
No, not at all. You're really not selling it. So that's kind of the heartbeat behind the Thrive and Dive. I want to show, Christians can enjoy life. Christians can have fun. And actually, that's going to touch into our topic a little bit today. But then Dive, I chose Dive because we're going to dive into different topics through a biblical worldview, right? So we're going to continue to the thriving, but we are going to dive into our topic of conversation today that David and I have discussed. We wanted to bring on here on Thrive and Dive. And this is the topic. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. The topic we are talking about is God's rules, His law, His word is a place where we find freedom. A lot of the times people can see laws, rules as negative. Oh, no, rules, right? It's like, don't give me more rules. That seems very, what's it called? Counterintuitive, or like, sucking the fun out of life, right? I just want to be, do whatever I want, whatever I please, whenever I want to please type of thing. But when you put rules on me, I feel confined. I feel trapped. I feel oppressed even, right? And we want to talk about how God's rules are intended to oppress and suck the fun out of life. They're actually going to give you freedom and more fun, actually, if you see them with the right perspective. So is that kind of where we're going to go today, David?
Yeah, I'll go whenever we want to go.
But is that kind of summarize kind of what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, that's kind of what we were talking a little bit about. Was just, how to find freedom and the rules I got to give.
Yeah, okay. So David, as we jump in, go ahead and give us the full context as to why this topic came to your heart and mind. It's kind of funny, actually, because when we were actually playing poker last night, and we were talking about the topic, right? And it was funny because I just had this topic with a buddy of ours named Joseph, who's been on the channel that morning. We were talking about literally the exact same thing David wanted to bring up on Thrive and Dive. So, coincidence? I think not. It's kind of cool how the Lord brings conversations to mind. Even actually this morning, David, I met with a student, and we were going through a book, and he pulled something out of the book that literally goes with what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to bring it up at some point. So it's just it's kind of cool how so many things align. But anyway, what brought you to? What was the context that brought you to want to talk about this topic?
Yeah. Well, briefly, I don't want to get into it yet. I'll bring it up later. But I went to church last night at Calvary, and a friend of mine was teaching in the youth, so I wanted to go see, his sermon. So I went in there. It was Shane Gallagher, whoever knows who that is, and he talked about the Israelites and just how when they were in the desert wandering, they complained a lot, and they were just finding every excuse to complain to God.
Yeah.
Whether it was the food, whether it was, just wandering or whatever it may be, they were always finding reasons to either rebel or get angry or get mad at God. And so from that, God gave them these rules because He wanted them to get closer to Him. So God gives them all these rules and all these stipulations so when He provides for them in order that they grow closer to Him. But instead of being thankful and relying on Him, they grunge and complain, and they refer back to the times when they were in Egypt and were slaves, like legitimately slaves. And so they weren't thankful for the providence that God had given them, these rules that He had given them, and instead were complaining about the slave. They would rather be in slavery where they thought they had freedom. So that's really kind of the backdrop for where I started thinking about it. I was just thinking about it while I was in church last night, and I love that topic. So we were just talking about it last night a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Because there's a lot of parallels, guys. So he's referring to the Old Testament. Sometimes we kind of see some people have this connotation that the Old Testament's kind of like, whatever. It's just kind of good old history to understand the Israelites, God's chosen vessel to bring the Messiah, yada, yada. There's not a whole lot of practical application, right? You got the Mosaic Law, 613 law, ceremonial, civil,
Yeah.
and I forget the third category, right? It's like all of it seems so cryptic and like, man, so irrelevant, right? I don't make lamb sacrifices in my backyard anymore, right? It's not really a thing. And all these, if you read the book of Leviticus specifically, it's like, oh man, it seems so dry. But I would argue, no, the Old Testament is full of life-giving principles, life-giving stories, life-giving lessons and applications for our life today. So I like the parallel you made, the children of Israel wandering in the desert, because of their own doing. If you read in Numbers, it was their fault they're wandering in the desert because of a decision they made not to trust in God. And they basically are complaining about wanting to go back to the lifestyle in Egypt. And if you don't know your Old Testament, in Egypt they were slaves. Like, not like indentured servants slaves. They're like manual labor, getting whipped to shreds, building all of the Egyptian I don't know. Maybe they built the pyramids. I don't know. Maybe they're the ones who made the pyramids, right? Wasn't aliens, right? So like, they wanted that over following what the Lord had for them, and it's just interesting perspective, right? So what we want to talk about, David, is how are we sometimes like the Israelites, where we get so wrapped up and start complaining about God's word, complaining about the lifestyle he has called us to do, to walk in sanctification and holiness, and we just want to go back to Egypt, whatever Egypt was for you, right? Back to the lifestyle where I had freedom, I could do whatever I pleased. There wasn't a Christian ethic back then. There wasn't a need to grow in sanctification, right? So like, how do we address that? Well, I guess my question for you is, what do you say to the Christian? I would say a true Christian falls in love with God's word and isn't necessarily asking these questions, though Christians can have moments of weakness where they are kind of like questioning, like, man, this whole like abstain from premarital intimacy, this whole like, being a part of a church fellowship. I get it. There's times where I'm even, like, man, this is kind of hard, right? But for the most part, I'm in love with God's word. I'm in love with his laws because I'm in love with God, right? I follow them out of love and gratitude, not out of a desire to be more pious and sanctified and holy in a more pharisaical sense, right? But what would you say to the one who's kind of like contemplating Christianity? They're not sold in yet. They don't have that full relationship with the Lord yet. They're going to youth group. Maybe they're a student that's just testing out youth group, or testing out church or whatever, or their friend had a conversation with them about spiritual matters, but they're getting so hung up on the fact that the God that their friend worships, the God that church worships, seems so rule-oriented, seems so, I don't know, oppressive, and like, why can't I do the things of this world?
Yeah.
What would you say to that person that's contemplating that?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, I would see this imaginary person, as maybe one of two possibilities. Either they believe that God is real, and they know that, but they're trying to decide whether or not they want to live by it.
Mm-hmm.
Which I've definitely, like, there's been a time in my life where I'm like, I know God is real factually, but do I want to follow him? Do I want to live by these rules? And then there's also an idea of you. Well, I don't know which one I just said, but that you do believe in he is. I don't know if I said it, if you did or you don't.
Yeah.
But so there's those who believe in him and are trying to decide if you want to follow his rules, and then there's people who don't really know if he even exists yet.
Okay, right.
Like who are just going to youth, like you just said, who are only coming here a couple times, and you're like, I don't know if this is real or not.
Yeah.
Do I even want to try and get my nose into this?
Yeah.
And so for both of those, I think the way to combat that, and the way you realize that this is what you want to do and that it's better than the alternative, is when you actually experience it. Like, anybody who doesn't experience what it means to be a Christ follower clearly isn't going to think that's better than what the world offers, because the world offers a lot of fun, good things.
Yeah.
But they have consequences. And when you've decided to follow Christ and you decide to follow God and you do the things that God tells you and you see that the fruit that it bears and that the life that it gives you through community with others, through serving others and the joy that that brings, you realize, oh, this is way better than what the world has to offer. So I think a lot of it comes to is not experiencing and not knowing what you are really trying to decide. If you don't know what both options are completely, you are biased to the way of this world because you know that already. You know that it can be fun. But if you don't realize, that following the Lord can be fun and fulfilling, it's hard to try and wrap your brain or to try and justify giving up everything else.
Yeah. So here's an example, David. Good thoughts. So I was a Bible teacher, like I've said multiple times on this channel. And during the 10th grade, I taught 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. During the 10th grade Bible class, so we were studying New Testament, I had a segment in my curriculum that I put in there where we would pause the material in New Testament class, pause the life of Christ, pause the Gospels, whatever, and we would do things called biblical discussions, where students would write down topics that they wanted to discuss in a controlled environment, right? Obviously, I didn't let people just go crazy and have huge argumentation in the classroom, but just like, man, I want to know what the Bible says about these more touchy subjects, right?
Yeah.
Like we address things like suicide, alcohol. Oh, I should have said the S word. I think that's bad for the algorithm. I'm still learning how YouTube works. Anyway, evangelism, just these different topics, right? And one of them I got was, I won't say the actual word because I think that's bad for the algorithm as well, but premarital intimacy. You guys probably know what I'm referring to, right? Like, why can't we have premarital intimacy? Why does the Bible speak against that? And me, growing up in a Bible-believing home, it's like second nature. Like, I know that's a big no-no, right? It's like, I'm not doing that, right? The Bible says so. Stay away from immorality and things like that. But to someone who's not been raised in a Christian environment, they could be a little confused as to, wait, why is that wrong? Why can't I have premarital intimacy, right? And I was like, man, I really don't want to touch this topic because it's kind of touchy. It's kind of weird to discuss to guys and girls. But I prayed about it. I'm like, all right, Lord, they wrote it down, and I want to be faithful. Like I told them, we're going to talk about the things that you write down. Obviously, I get to decide how we talk about it and things like that. But I didn't want to just, it's like a common thing. We don't want to address something that's kind of touchy because it could get a little messy or it's a little intimidating, right? I'm like, no, I want to embrace the awkwardness. I want to embrace the intimidation because it needs to be talked about. Because if I don't talk about it, they're going to hear it from somebody else some other time.
Yeah.
So why? Let's have it in the controlled environment instead of them trying to figure it out on their own when they go to college or something, right? So I mentioned that story. Another story I want to mention. Freshman year of college for me, I went to an institution called Word of Life Bible Institute up in New York, and I was part of their soccer team. And something about that institution is that we viewed the sports teams more than just a competitive collegiate level soccer team. It was actually a ministry, right? The main goal is to do ministry through soccer, right? So one of the ways we would do that is whenever we would have an opposing team come to our home field, we'd play the game, but then we would invite them to come to our cafeteria and have dinner with us afterwards. Just hang out, have conversations. Obviously, we had kind of the goal and the agenda to not just make small talk, but eventually steer the conversation to spiritual matters and get talking about deeper things. It was cool. It was a really cool experience. Nothing I've ever experienced before. And I remember I was talking with a group of guys from the opposing team. We just played. I can't remember if we won or lost. Regardless, that was hard. Especially if you lost. I lost these guys.
Yeah,
I gotta go talk to them. It's like, oh my
dude,
goodness. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, regardless, I was talking to a group of guys. It was just me, I remember. And I had some buddies, teammates that were with me. But I remember I was leading the conversation. And I forget all the details. But long story short, it came out. And I'm being kind of personal here. But it's kind of, we're talking about it, right? It came out that they asked me if I was a virgin, right? And I said yes. And that blew their minds. Yeah. They're like, what? They're like, they kind of like, it's like they never met a virgin before. So I was like, and they couldn't believe it. And I forget how the conversation went, but long story short, I tried to show them why I have abstained from intimacy from not only a biblical standpoint, because if they don't believe the Bible, obviously they're not going to care what the Bible says, but also through, man, this works out better for you if you abstain and wait for the one person, and then that's the only person, right? Obviously, a very controversial thing to outsiders. Like, well, we got an outsider view, so you got to test drive the vehicle before you.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It's
yeah,
a big
it's
argument.
so
Yeah.
funny. I think it's so funny. But anyway, I share those two stories because you have people who are exploring Christianity, and something I think they get hung up on is the Christian ethic on some things. Obviously, the premarital intimacy is one example, but there's others, like being meek, being humble, right? Not cutting corners, being ethical in business. We have a Christian ethic that people find like excessive. Like, it's kind of over the
And
top. It's
Yeah.
like, why can't I have a little bit of premarital intimacy and then get married and then stick to the one person? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, so what I say to them, David, well, I'll finish my thought and then I'll let you share some things. What I would say to them is something that I heard from my professor in my freshman year at the Word of Life Bible Institute. David, and you said it pretty much yesterday when we were playing poker. This professor was saying, I forget the full context, but he's saying that living the life of Christ, living in Christian ethics, actually brings freedom. People think that true freedom is being able to do what you want. But he would argue, no, that's actually not true freedom. Why? Because if you can do whatever you want, you are putting yourself in a position to be enslaved by an addiction, a desire, an emotion, an appetite, whatever you call it, right?
Yeah.
Take the premarital intimacy for example, right? You indulge in that and you get hooked on that, you get addicted to that, you get enough's never enough, you got to have multiple people, you got to do it multiple times. That's what we call enslavement, right? You might not recognize it, but if I'm an outsider looking in, you're constantly chasing that dopamine rush from that type of experience. You are not free. You are not free at all. You're chasing something that's enslaving you. Take substance abuse, for example, right? Oh, we need to have freedom to indulge in whatever we want, however much we want, yada, yada, yada. Until you become an addict, right? I know that's not everybody's story. I know some people can have self-control. I get that. There's exceptions to the rule. But there's no restrictions. So you think there's freedom, but in reality, it brings bondage. It brings enslavement. So true freedom is being able to walk with self-control, recognizing that the rules that are in place are not things to stop you and prohibit you from enjoying life, but they're actually guardrails that keep you on the good life, to the life of freedom. And when I heard that, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. So he totally turned it on his head. The rules that God puts in place aren't to take away your freedom, it's to protect your freedom. And I'm like, oh, that's a whole different way of kind of seeing that. So your thoughts on all that? I know I just shared a lot right there.
Yeah, well, I had two things. One on when you were talking, I had a similar experience with some other people, just telling them about like what stuff I haven't done. They were shocked, but I'll get back to that. What you were just saying, I 100% agree. And I think we were honestly, it's not just good for us to have rules, it's necessary. And we want them. I think people tell themselves, oh, I don't want rules. I don't want people over me. I want to do what I want to do. But I think if you have complete freedom, you realize that you actually do want rules. And I think we were made for rules and we desire rules. Like we crave it. For instance, we have natural rules like gravity and things like that that keep life sustained and, the world in order. Without it, the world would be chaos. But in regular life too, we have rules. You have to drive on the right side of the street. You have to stop at stop signs. You have to follow all these rules on the road and legally. But we have rules when it comes to interacting with humans and how we're supposed to, shake hands or be polite and all this stuff. And that keeps our world rolling. But, just discipline too is another way of looking at it too. It's kind of a secular way, but it is a biblical thing, is having discipline and abstaining from whether it is alcohol. Now people are starting to realize, I think, just through other influencers and the social media and stuff like that, oh, maybe this isn't all it's cut out to be. I think we're starting to finally see a little bit of, oh, total freedom isn't amazing, and it's not all that's cracked up to be. Because I'm starting to see a lot of influencers really talking about, abstaining from what do you call it,
Premarital intimacy.
and how that can get iffy, and drinking all the time, how that can ruin your life. And I'm starting to see it from people who are not religious at all.
Right.
And I think that's just a testament to, yeah, these aren't just buzzkill rules that God made. It's not just for no reason at all to just, suck the life out of you. It's for a purpose. It actually benefits your life. It doesn't take away from it. And like, for example, we were talking about this, I think it was with you. I was talking about this, about how rules are set up to make your life better. Like, sorry about that. We can cut this out, right?
We usually just keep it raw. It's okay, yeah.
Well, now I'm having a brain fart. But, yeah, okay, now I remember what it was. So our actions have consequences, good or bad.
Right.
And so the consequences of our actions when we're following God don't have any natural negative consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we're following God, life is never going to be perfect. So there will be tough times. But our actions, if they are morally right and they are God-centered, they're not going to have negative consequences. But when we're doing the things that God doesn't tell us that are of this world, like, remind me the word you used?
Premarital intimacy.
Premarital intimacy. Or just like abundance of anything, there are negative consequences, like having a baby when you don't want to, or,
True.
Getting diseases, or having fights with people. So all these things that are worldly that God warns us against, we see that they have negative consequences.
Yeah.
And that's why he sets them up that way, is because he doesn't want us to suffer those negative consequences of these natural actions.
Right. Is there any negative consequences to following God's ways and ethics?
I mean, you can see, like, maybe going to somebody and telling them the truth may hurt their feelings, and that might seem as a negative to a lot of people, but in the end, that's actually more beneficial.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that in another subject, but that, like, helps them out in the long run. It makes you a better friend for it, even though at the time it may feel like it's a negative thing. And it's the case with a lot of things that God tells us to do. At the time, it may seem like, oh, this doesn't feel good, or this doesn't feel maybe right sometimes. I don't know if there's any circumstances where you don't feel like you're doing the right thing following God. But there are definitely times where you feel like, oh, this doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel right. But in the long end, you see that, yes, this is actually right. This is what God does, and it produces better fruit.
Yeah. So I'd argue, there is no true negative consequences following God's way, right? The biggest hang-up I think people get is that they get FOMO. They feel like they're missing out by following God's way. And I get that. I sympathize with that until you realize that you really didn't miss out on anything when you do test those waters. I personally, I'm not patting myself on the back. I haven't tested out the deep waters of, falling away from God personally. But I know people who have, and they've shared their testimony. And it's so cool. It's like every time, and I don't say every very often, right? Because I don't like using like strong absolutes, but every testimony I've heard of someone who went off the deep end per se, neglected God's ways and followed their own, they realized they hit rock bottom. It wasn't cracked up to what it was meant to be, right? It didn't fulfill like it was promised, right? It's empty promises. The world promises so much fulfillment, but you leave empty, right? So you're not missing out, right? And it's that tension you gotta balance between present appetites that promise instant gratification, and then having a big perspective, future outlook on life, right, David? There's a story in the Bible. I've shared this before with students that are struggling with the fear of missing out, and they feel like they should indulge in something because everyone else is, or it promises to be pretty satisfying, right? And I turned to the story of Jacob and Esau, right? If you know the story, David, Jacob and Esau are brothers. Esau is more of a manly man who likes to hunt. He's the older brother. Jacob is more domesticated, I guess is the way to put it. He likes to be indoors and cook, and he's the younger brother, right? Esau comes back to the house from a long day of hunting. He is famished. He just wants food. He becomes desperate. He becomes a little exaggeratory, And he's like, Jacob, give me that stew you're making. I need it. I'm going to die. And Jacob has more brains than Esau, as we can see in the scripture. It's like, this guy is super desperate. He's really looking for some instant gratification. What can I get out of this, right? Because he knows people trade up some silly things to get instant gratification.
Yeah.
They'll sacrifice such important things to get that buzz, to get that satisfaction quickly, right? And that's kind of how culture is. We want the instant gratification. We don't want to wait long term. That's why a lot of people struggle with working out. Because it's a long term thing. It takes a while to see results, right? We want the results right away, right? So Esau's like, man, what good? So what does Jacob exchange the stew for? Esau's birthright. Something that's not really culturally relevant to us today, but back then, having a birthright, being the firstborn, was a big deal. I think you got 3 times the inheritance, so two-thirds of the inheritance, while the younger only got 1, and they had to split the 1 with if there was any other kids. And then I'm pretty sure the oldest had kind of judicial rights in the household, even, right? Kind of act kind of like a parent to the younger siblings because of their status as the firstborn. It's something that we just don't really have anymore, which I think is a good thing because I'm not the oldest. I'm glad my older brother didn't have judicial authority over our family growing up. Sorry, Joel. I mean, you probably would have done a good job, but submitting to my brother, what? I'll submit to my parents, right? But, so he traded all that up, a lifetime guarantee of good things with the inheritance and things like that, for a temporary bowl of stew. It's like, that's the worst trade in the history of mankind, right? And we look at Esau like, what an idiot, right? He traded up his future for just a present meal to satisfy a temporary appetite. What a ding-dong, right? But then we can be just like that. We trade up something so more precious for something in the moment, right? Going back, we've said it multiple times, a premarital intimacy, right? We trade up a lifelong satisfaction with our wife or husband for as a temporary boyfriend, girlfriend. I want that instant gratification right now. Yeah. Instead of thinking long term to how that instant gratification is going to affect you down the road. And we do it with other things as well, right? We cheat. We want the instant gratification of getting a good test score because we need to do well in this class, And then down the road, that cheating could bite your butt when it's found out or something, right? So we chase these temporary things because we want them now, but we lack the perspective to see the big picture. That, we got to shut down our appetites. Because the appetites are real, David. I'm speaking from experience, right? I'm not saying I have 0 appetites, and following the Lord's way is just like easy peasy. Come on, guys, get on my level. No, I have appetites towards sinful things on the daily probably, right? But it's that intentional decision to be like, nope, I know God's ways are best for me. These appetites are distractions. This is my flesh. We have a sinful nature that lives inside of us. That's something to talk about in the future, right? A lot of people don't think we have a sinful nature living inside of us. They think it's just biology, right? That's why we got to have multiple partners. Our biology just craves multiple women, David. That's why. That's like the argument. No, and I would say, no, it's not your biology. You have a sinful nature that's trying to go rogue and wreck your life, right? And we've got to say no to that sinful nature. We got to say no to those appetites and walk in accordance with God's word. And I'll say this one last thing, David. I think we've kind of already touched on it, but I just want to make sure. God's laws and rules are ultimately birthed out of love for us, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a parent telling his child, you can't play in the road, right? They're not trying to be a buzzkill. They're not trying to suck out all little Johnny's fun, like, oh, I can't be on the road. No, they care for little Johnny because they don't want to see little Johnny splattered on the concrete one afternoon because he got run over by a truck, right? So similarly, a silly example, but all the rules that God has given us is for our benefit because he loves us. It's kind of like contrasting two sets of parents. One set of parents that has like some pretty hardcore rules. I'll take my family, for example. We had a lot of rules, not going to lie, right? But then contrast that with a family, a kid whose parents kind of don't really care, right? Do whatever you want, little Johnny. And there's no rules. And I'm sitting here with a bunch of rules being like, man, Johnny can do whatever he wants. I have rules, as I mature, though, I realized, man, I'm glad I wasn't like little Johnny. I felt bad for little Johnny. He didn't have parents that cared enough about him to kind of protect him from things. So he had some rough experiences. Yeah, he had freedom, but he has a lot of baggage now. I'm thankful for my parents because they loved me enough to protect me from different things. I didn't like it in the moment. Don't get me wrong, right? One of the rules was not allowed to date until I was 18. That killed me in high school. I was like, my parents don't love me. They don't know what they're doing, right? But now I'm looking back, I'm thankful they didn't let me date until I was old enough to understand the purpose of it, right? So
100%.
that I'm kind of rambling now, but thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, we'll go off what you were saying. I think that's a great analogy, and I wish I brought it up earlier, but it's a great analogy of the parents because that's how God talks to us and how he describes himself as our father. And so he is like a father or a parent who is looking out for your best interest. Like you said, who doesn't want you to go play on the concrete or do whatever. And as a kid, you don't understand why, I want to go and play, on the playground or
the road is so much cooler, right?
Yeah.
And the driveway, obviously.
Look at this nice dark road.
Yeah.
But, and you don't understand it in that moment, but, when you're turning 18, you're like, oh, duh. Of course I want to let a kid play on the pavement. Like, that's dumb. And so I think for us now, too, it's hard. Even at our age, there's certain things like that. But also in high school, I know there's just a lot of people who don't quite grasp. They may know head knowledge, but they don't understand. Like refraining from premarital intimacy. And they can kind of understand why that is. But, you live that out and you decide you do want to follow your own way. And you go down 20, 30 years and you decide to get married. And then now you have problems because of the decisions you made in your past. And you're like, oh, now I understand.
Yeah.
And it's looking back on it, what is it, foresight, or looking back at 2020.
Yeah,
Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you see it better, and that's what God is trying to prevent, because he knows, when you're a little kid, you're going to want to play on the cement, but that's not what's good for you, and he's trying to prevent that. And another example, kind of going with what you were saying, that's been one of the bigger things in my life, talking about that FOMO, not wanting to miss out. When I was in high school, and I still don't do drinking or smoke or anything like that. Never have. And I do hang out with people who do. I don't really mind it per se. That's up to the circumstance. But they'll ask me, I'm like, you don't want to hit this pen, or you don't want to drink or anything? And I'm like, no, I'm good. And they know, all of them know by now. But they'll always ask me about it. It's just like, why not? They always ask me, why not? And I always tell them, I'm like, it may be fun. I've never tried it. I'd probably like some alcohol. I'd probably find some of it delicious. I might have a good time drinking alcohol. I might actually enjoy it. Like, I might really like it.
Yeah.
But is that worth the possible consequences of those actions? Like, right now, I've never drank, so I don't miss it at all. I don't have any desire to do it. It's like somebody telling you this is the best pizza in the world, and it was like, well, I don't really care. I've never tried it, so if I never try it, I don't really worry about it.
That's
true.
true.
So people always ask me about that. I'm like, don't you ever want to try it? I'm like, not really. The consequences really don't outweigh the rewards for me in that circumstance, and that always doesn't really make sense to people because I know what it's like. And I just want to say, it's a lot easier to avoid sins that you've never gone into. That one's an example, but these other things like intimacy, it's a lot easier if you never start. And when we don't do those things, we can easily say no to them, and we can look back and we'd be like, oh, I decided not to drink alcohol, and what was the trade-off for that? I might have had a good couple times, but instead I had to fill that time with something else. So maybe I went rock climbing, or I went out on adventures, or I went and played sports or something like that. So I in my personal view, I fill those things with things I think are even better than just having a social lubricant or just a drink to hang out. I think these things that God tells us to avoid, what he gives us is even better. So it's not even that avoiding those things are good. It's that he gives us things that are even better than that to fill that time with, or to fill that emptiness with.
That's good. And there's so many alternatives that God gives us of things we can do.
100%.
Obviously, you touched on it, the alcohol. That's another whole conversation for another whole day. Obviously, there's controversy. Yeah. I mean, I believe there's such thing as drinking responsibly, depending on your position and spiritual influence. But anyway, but thanks for sharing your testimony on that, and how, holistically speaking, You abstain from things. You have that perspective to know that there's better in store for me in God's will than chasing after the things of this world.
Yeah.
So that's good. So my encouragement to you guys, Thriving Divers, is develop that perspective, right? We become so short-sighted and all we think about are our appetites, that instant gratification, and the rules of God seem very annoying. But if you have perspective and maturity and you realize that life is so much more than the present gratification, it's long-term satisfaction in God, then you'll be on the right track to recognizing that the rules of God are there to protect your freedom, not squash it. It's to protect you from the bondage of so-called worldly freedom. So with that being said, David, this has been a good conversation. This is Thrive and Dive, thriving in life as we dive into deeper conversations. Have a good day, folks.